My name is Sandra Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. Tomorrow is supposed to be one of the most important days of my life because my little brother Marcus is getting married. I've been counting down the days for months, planning my outfit, wrapping his gift with extra care, and imagining how emotional I'll get watching him say his vows. Marcus and I have been through everything together since our parents' messy divorce when I was 12. Our Aunt Geraldine practically raised us during those difficult summers, becoming the mother figure we both needed. I'm sitting in my car outside her house right now, clutching the wedding gift I spent weeks choosing. My heart is racing with pure excitement. Before we dive into what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Please hit that like button and subscribe because what my aunt told me next completely shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. And the ending will leave you speechless. I practically skipped up the familiar walkway to Aunt Geraldine's house, the same red brick colonial where Marcus and I had spent countless childhood summers. The garden gnomes were still there, the white picket fence still needed that coat of paint she'd been promising to apply for 3 years. Everything looked exactly as it always had, which filled me with warmth and nostalgia. The smell of her famous pot roast drifted from the kitchen windows, and I could hear her favorite jazz music playing softly inside. I knocked twice before using my key, a privilege she'd given both Marcus and me years ago. "Aunt Geraldine, it's Sandra," I called out cheerfully, stepping into the entryway, lined with family photos spanning decades. There we were at various ages, gap-toothed grins at Christmas morning, sunburned faces at summer barbecues, graduation photos, birthday celebrations. A whole lifetime of memories covering those walls. She appeared from the kitchen, wiping flour-covered hands on her floral apron, but something was immediately wrong. Instead of her usual bright smile and warm hug, her face went completely pale. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, her eyes wide with what I could only describe as panic. "Sandra, sweetheart," she said, her voice strangely quiet and strained. "I wasn't expecting you today," I laughed, holding up the elegantly wrapped gift box. "I wanted to drop off Marcus's wedding present before tomorrow gets too hectic. Plus, I thought maybe I could help with any last-minute preparations. I took the whole day off work because honestly, I'm so excited I can barely sit still." The color drained even further from her face. She actually gripped the doorframe for support, and I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Is everything okay, Aunt Geraldine? You look upset about something." She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, like she couldn't figure out what words to use. The silence stretched between us, until it became genuinely uncomfortable. That's when I said the words that changed everything. "I honestly can't wait for tomorrow. I've been dreaming about Marcus's wedding for months. I even practiced not crying during the ceremony, but I know I'm going to be a complete mess when I see him in his tuxedo." Aunt Geraldine's knees actually buckled slightly. She had to steady herself against the wall, and her breathing became shallow and rapid. For a moment, I thought she might faint right there in the hallway. "Aunt Geraldine, what's wrong? You're scaring me." She closed her eyes tightly, took several deep breaths, then looked at me with the most heartbroken expression I'd ever seen on another human being's face. "Sandra, honey," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "The wedding, it already happened. It was last week." I actually laughed out loud, because surely I'd misunderstood her. "What do you mean it was last week?" "The wedding is tomorrow, Saturday the 15th. We've been planning this for months. I have the date circled on 3 different calendars." "No, sweetheart. Marcus and Jennifer got married last Saturday, 7 days ago." The gift box slipped from my suddenly numb fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo through the entire house. I felt like someone had just punched me in the chest and knocked all the air from my lungs. "That's impossible," I managed to stammer. "I'm his sister. I'm supposed to be in the wedding party. I bought a dress months ago. I requested time off work. We've talked about this constantly." Aunt Geraldine's eyes filled with tears that began spilling down her cheeks. "Sandra, you need to sit down, please." "No, I don't need to sit down. I need you to explain to me how my brother got married without me knowing about it. How is that even possible?" But even as I said the words, pieces were starting to fall into place in my mind. Marcus's recent distance during our phone calls. The way he'd been vague about wedding details whenever I asked specific questions. How he'd canceled our last 3 coffee dates, always claiming he was too busy with work. The strange feeling I'd had that something was off, but I'd pushed it aside, thinking it was just pre-wedding stress. "Sandra, please sit down. There's so much you need to know." She guided me to the living room couch where Marcus and I had spent countless afternoons as children, reading books and watching old movies during summer visits. The same floral cushions, the same coffee table with water ring stains from years of family gatherings. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Everything felt wrong and distorted, like I'd walked into some alternate reality. I don't understand any of this, I kept repeating, as Aunt Geraldine sat beside me, her hands wringing together nervously in her lap. How could Marcus get married without telling me? How could you not tell me? She was crying openly now, tears streaming steadily down her face. They decided they wanted a small, intimate ceremony. Just immediate family, they said. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I am immediate family. I'm his only sister. His only sibling. I know, sweetheart. I know you are. Then why wasn't I there? Why didn't anyone tell me this was happening? Aunt Geraldine looked away, staring at her hands instead of meeting my eyes. Jennifer's family. They're very wealthy, very prominent in Chicago social circles. They wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, very elegant and sophisticated. A chill ran down my spine as I began to understand where this was going. What does Jennifer's family's wealth have to do with me not being at my brother's wedding? Marcus thought, they thought. She was struggling to find words that wouldn't devastate me completely. They were concerned that you might not fit in with Jennifer's family and their social circle. The room started spinning slightly. I gripped the arm of the couch to keep myself steady. Fit in how? What exactly is wrong with me that I can't fit in at my own brother's wedding? Nothing is wrong with you, Sandra. You're absolutely perfect just as you are. But Jennifer comes from what they call old money. Her father owns a chain of luxury hotels across the Midwest. Her mother sits on the boards of several prominent charities. All their friends are doctors, lawyers, business executives, people with significant wealth and social standing. And I'm just a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized company, making $45,000 a year, I finished, the painful reality crystallizing in my mind. Marcus has been trying desperately to impress Jennifer's father ever since they got engaged. He thinks having the right connections could accelerate his career at the investment firm. He's been different lately. Much more concerned with appearances and status than he used to be. I thought about our recent conversations, how Marcus had seemed increasingly focused on material things, name-dropping expensive restaurants he'd been to, mentioning designer clothes Jennifer had bought, talking about exclusive events they'd attended. I'd assumed he was just excited about his new life with Jennifer, not that he was systematically distancing himself from his old life with me. So they decided I was too embarrassing to have at the wedding? Aunt Geraldine reached for my hand, but I pulled away instinctively. It wasn't exactly like that, Sandra. Marcus does love you. If he loved me, I would have been there. If he loved me, he wouldn't have spent months lying to my face about wedding plans. He didn't want to hurt your feelings by telling you directly. I stood up abruptly and began pacing toward the window that overlooked the backyard where Marcus and I had played endless games of tag and hide-and-seek as children. So instead of potentially hurting my feelings by being honest, he decided to completely devastate me by lying and excluding me entirely? That makes perfect sense. The silence from behind me was deafening and told me everything I needed to know. I want to see pictures, I said, turning back to face her. Sandra, I don't think that's a good idea right now. Show me the pictures from my brother's wedding that I wasn't allowed to attend. With trembling hands that she could barely control, Aunt Geraldine picked up her phone from the coffee table. She hesitated for several long moments, clearly not wanting to cause me more pain, then slowly scrolled through her photo gallery until she found what she was looking for. The first image she showed me took my breath away completely. Marcus stood at an elaborate altar that looked like something from a fairy tale, decorated with cascading white roses and delicate baby's breath, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo I'd never seen before. He was smiling broader and more genuinely than I'd seen him smile in years, looking confident and handsome and radiantly happy. Beside him stood Jennifer in the most stunning wedding dress I'd ever laid eyes on, all flowing silk and intricate pearl beadwork that probably cost more money than I made in an entire year. The Brookfield Country Club, Aunt Geraldine said quietly when she saw me staring. Jennifer's family has been members there for 3 generations. The ceremony was in their rose garden. I swiped to the next photo with shaking fingers. The wedding party looked like they'd stepped directly out of a high-fashion magazine. All perfectly coordinated in expensive attire that screamed wealth and sophistication. Jennifer's 3 sisters as bridesmaids in custom-designed dresses. Marcus's college roommate as best man in a tuxedo that matched Marcus's exactly. Everyone looked polished and elegant and like they belonged in this rarefied world. Another swipe revealed the reception venue, which was absolutely breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings. Elaborate floral centerpieces graced every table, and everything sparkled with an opulence I'd only seen in movies about wealthy families. Who else knew? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sandra. Who else in our family knew that I wasn't invited to Marcus's wedding? Aunt Geraldine's silence stretched so long I wondered if she was going to answer at all. Finally, she said, everyone who attended knew you weren't going to be there. Everyone? All the family members who were invited. Yes. They knew Marcus had decided not to include you. My heart felt like it was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. Uncle Robert? Aunt Patricia? Cousins Jenny and Michael? They all knew? She nodded miserably, fresh tears starting to flow. And not one single person thought to call me? Not one person in our entire family thought to say, hey Sandra, did you know your brother is getting married this weekend and you're not invited? Marcus specifically asked everyone not to say anything to you. He said he would handle explaining everything after the wedding was over. It's been a week, Aunt Geraldine. A full week since the wedding? When exactly was he planning to handle it? I sank back down onto the couch, still holding her phone, staring at a photo of Marcus and Jennifer cutting an elaborate 3-tier wedding cake while everyone around them laughed and celebrated. He looked so completely happy, so utterly content, so entirely unconcerned, that his only sibling was missing from the most important day of his entire life. There's more you need to know, Aunt Geraldine said so quietly I almost didn't hear her. More what? More about why this happened. More about what's been going on that you don't know about. I looked up at her, and the expression of guilt and shame on her face told me that whatever was coming next would be even worse than what I'd already learned. What else has my brother done, Aunt Geraldine? She took a shaky breath that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. The wedding wasn't the first time you were deliberately excluded, Sandra. This has been happening for over a year. Those words hung in the air like poison gas, slowly choking the life out of everything I thought I knew about my family and my relationship with my brother. What do you mean this has been happening for over a year? Aunt Geraldine's entire body was shaking now as she prepared to reveal secrets she'd been carrying for months. Do you remember Marcus's birthday party last March? The big celebration he said was canceled because he was too swamped with work projects? I nodded, remembering how disappointed I'd been when Marcus called just 2 days before his 29th birthday to tell me they'd decided to skip the party entirely this year. It wasn't canceled, Sandra. They had a huge celebration at Jennifer's parents' estate in Lake Forest. Over 50 people, with catered food from that expensive French restaurant downtown, a live jazz quartet, and enough champagne to float a small boat. The betrayal hit my nervous system like ice water flooding my veins. You were there. Yes, I was there, and I felt sick about it the entire time. But Marcus told me that if I said anything to you or tried to include you, he would cut me out of his life completely. Her voice broke as she continued. Sandra, you and Marcus are all the family I have left in this world. When your parents got divorced and moved to opposite coasts, you two became my entire universe. I couldn't bear the thought of losing Marcus too. So instead you helped him systematically lie to me. I tried to talk him out of it, sweetheart. I begged him to reconsider, to include you, to at least be honest with you about what was happening. But Jennifer had already made up her mind about what kind of people should be part of their social circle. And what kind of person am I, according to Jennifer? According to her, you're too ordinary, too middle class, too normal. She was genuinely worried that having a sister who works a regular job and drives a 7-year-old Honda and lives in a modest apartment would somehow reflect poorly on Marcus as he tries to climb the corporate ladder. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of surreal nightmare. And Marcus agreed with this assessment? Marcus has changed dramatically since he started dating Jennifer seriously, Sandra. Ever since he got that big promotion at the investment firm and started moving in her family's circles, he's become completely obsessed with status symbols and social appearances. Jennifer's father has business connections that could set Marcus up financially for the rest of his life. And Marcus has convinced himself that he's willing to do absolutely anything to impress the man, including pretending his sister doesn't exist. It started with small things that I thought were just coincidences. They'd have intimate dinner parties and somehow never think to invite you. Then there were holiday gatherings at Jennifer's family's mansion where you mysteriously weren't included. Then bigger celebrations like birthdays and work promotions where you were completely left out. I thought back over the past 18 months, remembering all the times Marcus had been too busy to meet for our regular coffee dates, All the family events I'd somehow never heard about until weeks after they happened. All the phone conversations where he seemed distracted and eager to get off the line quickly. The engagement party, I said suddenly, a memory surfacing. He told me they decided not to have one because they wanted to keep things low-key. Aunt Geraldine closed her eyes in shame. It was at the Palmer House downtown. 200 guests, with an orchestra and ice sculptures and champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month. His promotion celebration dinner that he said was just going to be a quiet thing with Jennifer at their favorite restaurant. 75 people at the most exclusive private dining room in the city. Each revelation felt like another piece of my heart being torn away and crumbled into dust. My brother, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world, had been living a completely double life for over a year, systematically erasing me from every important moment while I remained completely oblivious. How many times, Aunt Geraldine? How many times did Marcus celebrate the big moments of his life while actively making sure I couldn't be there to share them with him? Too many, she whispered. Way too many to count. I walked over to the mantelpiece, where framed family photos from our childhood still sat in their places of honor. Pictures of Marcus and me building sandcastles during summer vacations, opening Christmas presents together, celebrating birthdays with matching grins covered in chocolate frosting. We looked so happy in those photos, so connected, so genuinely devoted to each other. Did he tell Jennifer's family that I don't exist? The pause that followed was far too long and told me everything I needed to know. Not exactly, Aunt Geraldine finally said. What exactly did he tell them? He told them you were a distant relative he'd grown up around but wasn't particularly close to anymore. Someone he saw occasionally at family gatherings but didn't really have an ongoing relationship with. The final devastating blow. My own brother had not only excluded me from his new life, but had actively rewritten our entire shared history to make me disappear from his narrative entirely. So in Jennifer's world, Marcus is essentially an only child who occasionally mentions some distant cousin named Sandra who used to be around when he was younger. Yes. I turned back to face her, and I could see in her eyes that she still hadn't told me everything. What else? I can see there's more. Just tell me all of it now, so I can process the full extent of what my brother has done. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking with the weight of secrets she'd been carrying alone for months. He made everyone in the family promise not to post any photos on social media, if you were in them. At the few family gatherings where you were still included, people had to be extremely careful about what they shared online in case Jennifer or anyone from her family saw the posts. He was that ashamed of me. And at events where you weren't included, he specifically instructed people to crop you out of any older photos they might want to share, or to avoid posting throwback pictures that showed you and him together. I sank into the armchair across from the couch, feeling like my entire sense of identity was dissolving before my eyes. The relationship with my brother that had been the foundation of my emotional life for 32 years had apparently been a complete lie for the past year and a half. Why are you finally telling me all this now? I asked. Aunt Geraldine wiped her eyes with tissues, trying to compose herself enough to speak clearly. Because I can't carry this guilt anymore. It's been eating me alive for months. And because... She hesitated, looking uncertain about whether to continue. Because what, Aunt Geraldine? Because now they desperately need something from you. A cold dread settled deep in my stomach, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. What do you mean they need something from me? Aunt Geraldine stood up and walked to the kitchen, returning moments later with a cup of chamomile tea that she set in front of me with hands that were still visibly trembling. She sat back down and took several deep breaths before continuing. Marcus called me yesterday evening. He and Jennifer are in serious financial trouble, Sandra. Much more serious than I think even they fully understand yet. I almost laughed at the complete absurdity of the situation. Financial trouble? But Jennifer's family has more money than they know what to do with, and Marcus just got that huge promotion he's been working toward for years. That's exactly the problem. The promotion came with enormous pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle and social status. Marcus has been spending money he absolutely doesn't have, trying desperately to keep up with Jennifer's social circle and prove to her father that he's worthy of being part of their family. What kind of spending are we talking about? The wedding alone cost them over $80,000, Sandra. $80,000 for one single day. I couldn't even begin to wrap my mind around that number. My entire annual salary was barely more than that, and they'd spent it on one wedding celebration that I wasn't even allowed to attend. How is that even possible? Jennifer insisted on having everything absolutely perfect to impress her parents' social circle. The wedding dress cost $12,000. The flowers were $15,000. The reception venue rental was $20,000. The catering was $18,000. The photographer was $8,000. The string quartet was $5,000. Every single detail was the most expensive option available. That's completely insane. But here's the thing, Sandra. Since they wanted to prove to Jennifer's parents that they could afford this lifestyle without any financial help, they put almost all of it on credit cards and took out personal loans to cover the rest. They went into debt for a wedding, massive debt. But it gets so much worse. They also bought a house in Jennifer's parents' neighborhood so they could maintain the right social image. A house they absolutely cannot afford under any circumstances. I shook my head in complete disbelief. Then why on earth did they buy it? Because Jennifer was embarrassed that they were still living in Marcus's old apartment downtown. She said it wasn't appropriate for someone in his position to live somewhere so modest, that it would hurt his reputation with her family and their social connections. His apartment was perfectly nice. It was in a great neighborhood with good restaurants and shops. But it wasn't impressive enough for Jennifer's standards. So now they're stuck with mortgage payments that are literally more than Marcus's entire monthly take-home pay, even with his promotion. How are they surviving? They're not. Marcus made a series of increasingly desperate investment decisions, hoping to generate quick returns that could help them cover their monthly expenses. He borrowed against his retirement account, maxed out multiple credit cards, and put everything into high-risk stock options that he was convinced were going to make them rich quickly. Let me guess, the investments didn't work out the way he hoped. He lost almost everything, Sandra, $35,000 gone in less than 2 months. I tried to process this information about my brother, who had always been careful with money growing up, who used to help me create budgets for my college expenses, who had once lectured me about the importance of building an emergency fund. So what does any of this financial disaster have to do with me? Aunt Geraldine looked down at her hands, clearly dreading what she had to say next. They're going to lose the house, Sandra. The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings. Jennifer's parents found out about the extent of their financial problems, and they're absolutely furious. Why are Jennifer's parents angry? Can't they just bail them out? Jennifer's father feels like Marcus deliberately deceived him about his financial stability and responsibility. He's embarrassed that his daughter married someone who would make such reckless decisions, and he's refused to help them financially. He said they need to figure out how to clean up their own mess. So they're facing foreclosure and have no family support. Jennifer has been having severe panic attacks about the situation. Their marriage is already showing serious strain because they're fighting constantly about money and blame. Jennifer is talking about moving back in with her parents if they can't find a solution soon. I still don't understand what any of this has to do with me. Aunt Geraldine took a deep breath and looked directly into my eyes. Marcus asked me to talk to you about the lake house. Everything suddenly clicked into place with perfect, horrible clarity. The lake house. The beautiful waterfront property I'd inherited from our grandmother Rose 2 years ago, sitting on pristine Lake Geneva about 90 minutes north of Chicago. Grandma Rose had specifically left it to me in her will, saying she knew I would take proper care of it and appreciate its history the way she had. He wants to stay at the lake house. He needs somewhere to live rent-free while they try to rebuild their finances from the ground up. Somewhere they can stay for several months without having to worry about mortgage payments or rent, while Marcus figures out how to dig them out of this financial hole. I stood up so abruptly that I knocked over the teacup, sending chamomile tea spilling across the coffee table. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. My brother spent over a year systematically excluding me from his life because I wasn't sophisticated enough for his new social circle. He lied to me repeatedly, kept me away from his wedding, convinced his wife that I barely exist in his life, and instructed family members to literally edit me out of photographs. And now that his fancy lifestyle has completely bankrupted him and destroyed his marriage, he wants to move into the house I inherited and live there for free while he gets his life back together. Sandra, I know exactly how this sounds. It sounds like he has absolutely incredible nerve. He's desperate, sweetheart. They both are. Jennifer is threatening to leave him if they can't find a solution quickly. And that's supposed to make me want to help them? Aunt Geraldine was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with her own feelings about the situation. He's still your brother, Sandra. Is he? Because brothers don't usually spend over a year pretending their sisters don't exist. People make terrible mistakes when they're scared or trying to impress others. Maybe this could be an opportunity for you two to rebuild your relationship. I walked back to the window, staring out at the yard where Marcus and I had once been inseparable. where we'd made promises to always be there for each other no matter what life threw at us. Has he asked about me at all during these conversations about needing help? Has he mentioned that he owes me an apology for what he's done? Has he acknowledged that he systematically betrayed his sister for over a year? The silence that followed gave me my answer. He hasn't, has he? In all these discussions about his financial problems and needing a place to stay, he hasn't once mentioned that he completely destroyed his relationship with his sister. I think he's planning to call you himself soon. To apologize for lying to me and excluding me from the most important events of his life. To ask you about staying at the lake house. Not to apologize, just to ask for help. Aunt Geraldine nodded sadly, and I could see that she was beginning to understand how completely unreasonable Marcus's expectations were. For the first time since this conversation had started, I felt something other than heartbreak and betrayal washing over me. I felt a strange, clear sense of understanding, like thick fog suddenly lifting from my mind, and allowing me to see the landscape clearly for the first time in months. Aunt Geraldine, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. In all the years you've known me, have I ever been anything other than completely loving and supportive toward Marcus? Never. You've always been the most devoted sister anyone could ask for. Have I ever done anything to embarrass him or make his life more difficult in any way? Absolutely not. You've always been nothing but proud of his accomplishments and supportive of his goals. Have I ever asked him for anything unreasonable or tried to take advantage of our relationship? You've never asked him for anything at all, Sandra. If anything, you've always been the one giving support and help. Then this situation isn't really about me not being good enough for his new life, is it? This is about him not being good enough for the life he thought he wanted. She looked at me with genuine surprise, like she hadn't expected me to reach that conclusion so quickly. And now that the life he chose over me has completely fallen apart, he wants me to be his safety net. I suppose that's one way to look at the situation. That's the only way to look at it, Aunt Geraldine. I felt something shifting inside me, some fundamental change in how I understood my relationship with my brother and my own worth as a person. For the first time in my adult life, I was seeing Marcus clearly, instead of through the lens of childhood loyalty and unconditional love. I need some time to think about all of this. Of course you do. This is an enormous amount to process. But I can already tell you that my brother has a lot of apologizing to do before we even begin to discuss him asking me for favors. The days that followed passed in a strange, surreal haze. I went through all the motions of my normal routine, going to work, grocery shopping, calling my mom for our weekly catch-up conversation, but everything felt fundamentally different. It was like I'd been living my entire adult life, believing in something that had turned out to be completely false. I found myself obsessively checking my phone, part of me hoping Marcus would call to explain everything and apologize so sincerely that we could somehow rebuild our relationship. But a bigger part of me was starting to realize that the brother I'd been missing and worrying about for months didn't actually exist anymore. The Marcus I'd grown up loving and trusting had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look his sister in the eye and lie to her for over a year without showing any signs of guilt or remorse. I spent hours walking through my neighborhood, trying to process the enormity of what I'd learned. My brother had not only excluded me from his wedding, but had been systematically erasing me from his life for over a year. Every canceled coffee date, every vague response about wedding plans, every time he'd seemed distracted during our phone calls, suddenly made perfect sense. He'd been actively living a double life, maintaining just enough contact with me to keep me from asking too many questions, while building an entirely separate existence where I didn't exist. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after learning about the wedding, my phone finally rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I stared at it for several rings before deciding to answer. Hello, Marcus? Hey there, Sandra. His voice was artificially cheerful, with that overly casual tone people use when they're trying to pretend nothing awkward has happened. How have you been? I feel like it's been way too long since we really talked. We talked 3 weeks ago, I said calmly. You told me how excited you were about the upcoming wedding. You said you couldn't wait for me to meet more of Jennifer's extended family at the reception. There was a long pause. Right. Yeah, about that whole wedding situation. What about it, Marcus? Well, things ended up changing pretty dramatically with our plans. It turned out to be much smaller than we originally thought it would be. He was still lying. Even now. Even after everything Aunt Geraldine had told me. Even when he desperately needed something from me. He couldn't bring himself to tell me the truth about what he'd done. How much smaller? Really small, actually. Like, immediate family only. Very intimate and low-key. And how was it? How was what? Your wedding, Marcus. How was your wedding? Another long pause. It was nice. Simple and elegant, just the way we wanted it. When did it take place? When did what take place? Your wedding. What day did you get married? The silence stretched so long, I wondered if the call had been dropped. Marcus? Are you still there? Last Saturday, he finally said, his voice much quieter than it had been. Last Saturday. So over a week ago. Yes, and you're just mentioning it to me now, a week and a half later, as a casual side note in a phone conversation. Sandra, I can explain the whole situation if you give me a chance. I'm sure you can explain it. But first, why are you calling me tonight? What's the real reason for this conversation? Another pause. I wanted to catch up with you, see how work is going, what you've been up to lately. Really? That's the only reason you called? Well, there is one other thing I wanted to run by you, actually. What's that? Jennifer and I are going through a bit of a challenging time financially right now. Some unexpected expenses came up, and we're having to make some adjustments to our living situation. What kind of adjustments? We might need to find a temporary place to stay while we get some things sorted out. And I was wondering, well, we were both wondering if maybe we could stay at the lake house for a while, just until we can get back on our feet financially. There it was. No apology for lying to me for over a year. No acknowledgement that he'd excluded me from the most important day of his life. No explanation for why I'd been systematically erased from his existence. Just a request for help from the sister he'd been too ashamed to include in his wedding. The lake house. Yeah, I know Grandma Rose left it to you, and I know you don't really use it much during the colder months anyway. It would be incredibly helpful for us, and we'd take excellent care of the property. How long were you thinking? Maybe a few months? 6 months at the most. Just until I can straighten out some issues at work, and we can get back into our own place. Your own place? I thought you and Jennifer bought a house. Complete silence. Marcus? We're having some temporary difficulties with the mortgage payments. Nothing we can't handle, but the lake house would give us some breathing room to work everything out properly. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Everything was crystal clear now. Marcus had called me not because he missed me or felt guilty about what he'd done, but because he needed something I owned. The sister who hadn't been good enough to witness his wedding was apparently good enough to provide rent-free housing when his perfect life collapsed. Can I ask you something, Marcus? Sure. In this difficult financial situation you're dealing with, have you considered asking Jennifer's family for help? Her father with all his hotel money and business connections? That's complicated. How is it complicated? They're not particularly happy with some of the financial decisions we've made recently. So they won't help you. They think we need to learn to handle our problems independently. But you think I should help you. You're family, Sandra. Family takes care of family. The irony was so thick, I could barely breathe. Family takes care of family. Exactly. Marcus, can I ask you something else? Sure. If I'm family, why wasn't I at your wedding? The silence that followed was so long and so complete that I genuinely thought he might have hung up on me. Marcus? Are you still there? It's complicated, Sandra. Uncomplicate it for me. Jennifer's family has certain expectations about social events. We thought it would be easier to keep the guest list very small to avoid any potential awkwardness. Awkwardness? You know what I mean. No, Marcus, I really don't know what you mean. Explain to me exactly how my presence at your wedding would have created awkwardness. Look, Jennifer's parents are very formal, very traditional people. They're accustomed to a particular type of social environment. We just thought it would be smoother for everyone if we kept things simple. You thought I would embarrass you. That's not what I said. Then what are you saying, Marcus? Silence. Let me help you out here, Marcus. You decided that your sister, who has loved and supported you unconditionally your entire life, wasn't sophisticated enough to witness your wedding, because your new wife and her family might judge you for having a middle-class sister with a regular job. You spent over a year lying to me and excluding me from important family events because you were ashamed of me. You let me get excited about your wedding, buy gifts, request time off work, all while knowing I would never be invited. And now that your attempts to impress these people have bankrupted you and destroyed your marriage, you want the sister you threw away to save you from the consequences. Does that sound accurate? Sandra, you don't understand the kind of pressure I've been under. Pressure to do what? Pressure to pretend I don't exist? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Marcus? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like that. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line, and I could hear Jennifer's voice in the background asking what was happening. I need your help, Sandra. We're going to lose everything if we can't find somewhere to stay. You already lost everything, Marcus. You lost it the day you decided I wasn't worth including in your life. Please, Sandra, I'm begging you. We have nowhere else to turn. And there it was. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire adult life. My little brother, who I'd protected and supported and loved more than anyone else in the world, was asking me to save him from the consequences of betraying me. Marcus, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. The lake house is a place for family. Real family. People who show up for each other consistently. Who celebrate together honestly. Who don't spend over a year lying to each other. People who consider each other important enough to include in the biggest moments of their lives. Sandra, you made it very clear over the past year that I'm not that kind of family to you, so no, you cannot stay at the lake house. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. But we have nowhere else to go. You should have thought about that before you decided I was too embarrassing to acknowledge as your sister. I never said you were embarrassing. You didn't have to say it, Marcus. You demonstrated it with every lie you told me and every event you excluded me from. I could hear Jennifer getting more agitated in the background, asking what was going wrong with the conversation. Marcus, I want you to know something important. I forgive you for what you've done. You forgive me? Yes, I forgive you. But not for your benefit. I'm forgiving you for my own peace of mind. Because carrying anger toward someone who clearly doesn't value me enough to be honest with me is a complete waste of my emotional energy. What does that mean for us? It means you made your choice about what kind of relationship we were going to have. You chose deception over honesty, exclusion over inclusion, impressing strangers over loyalty to family. I'm choosing not to participate in that kind of relationship anymore. Sandra, please. I genuinely hope you and Jennifer figure out your problems, Marcus. I hope you learn from this experience and become a better person because of it. But you're gonna have to figure it out without my help. I hung up before he could respond. The months that followed were unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my adult life. At first, the silence felt profoundly wrong and disorienting. For 32 years, Marcus had been the single most important person in my universe. Suddenly not talking to him, not worrying about his problems, not planning my schedule around being available whenever he needed support, felt like learning to live without a vital organ. But as the weeks turned into months, something remarkable started happening. The enormous amount of emotional energy I'd been pouring into a one-sided relationship began redirecting itself toward other areas of my life, and I discovered possibilities I'd never even considered before. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with over the years because I'd always been so focused on family obligations and being available for Marcus whenever he needed anything. Sarah, my old roommate, invited me to join her book club, and I discovered how much I'd missed having deep, intellectual conversations with people who genuinely valued my opinions. Mike and Lisa, a couple I'd been close to in college, started including me in their monthly dinner parties, and I remembered how good it felt to be around people who were excited to see me, rather than tolerating my presence. I joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning to explore different state parks around Illinois and Wisconsin. Being in nature, pushing my body physically, and spending time with people who shared my love of outdoor adventures filled a part of my soul that had been empty for years. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed discovering new places and challenging myself physically. On Thursday evenings, I started taking pottery classes at a local community center. Working with clay, creating something beautiful with my hands, learning a completely new skill gave me a sense of accomplishment and creativity that had been missing from my life. The other students in the class became genuine friends who celebrated each other's progress and supported each other through the frustrations of learning something difficult. Most surprisingly, I began having much more honest and authentic conversations with other family members. About 6 weeks after my final conversation with Marcus, my cousin Jenny called me with information that completely changed my understanding of what had happened at the wedding. Sandra, I need you to know that several of us were really uncomfortable with Marcus excluding you from the wedding. You were there? We were, and it felt wrong the entire time. Uncle Robert actually confronted Marcus directly about why you weren't there, and Marcus got defensive and told him it wasn't any of his business. Really? A bunch of us talked about it during the reception. Aunt Patricia said she'd never seen anything like it. A groom excluding his only sibling from his wedding. Cousin Michael said it reminded him of people who abandon their families when they get money or status. Why didn't anyone call me? We seriously considered it, Sandra. But Marcus had specifically asked everyone not to interfere, claiming he was handling the situation and that outside involvement would just make everything more complicated and painful for you. Why are you telling me this now? Because we heard through Aunt Geraldine that Marcus asked to stay at your lake house. And we wanted you to know that not everyone in this family thinks what he did was acceptable or normal. These conversations helped me understand that I hadn't been completely abandoned by everyone I cared about. Several family members had been quietly questioning Marcus's behavior for months, feeling uncomfortable with the systematic exclusion but not knowing how to address it without creating even more family drama. Some relatives revealed that they'd tried to advocate for including me in various events, only to be told by Marcus that it would create problems with Jennifer's family. Others admitted they'd felt like cowards for going along with the exclusion, because they didn't want to risk being cut off from family gatherings themselves. My relationship with Aunt Geraldine deepened in ways I'd never expected. She started coming to my apartment for dinner once a week, and we would spend hours talking about everything we'd both experienced during those difficult months. She shared details about the guilt she'd carried, the sleepless nights spent worrying about me, the arguments she'd had with Marcus behind the scenes, trying to convince him to include me. I should have been braver, Sandra, she told me one evening as we sat on my couch drinking tea after dinner. I should have told you the truth from the very beginning, regardless of what Marcus threatened. You were caught in an impossible situation, Aunt Geraldine. I understand why you felt like you had to choose between us, but I chose wrong. I was so terrified of losing Marcus that I participated in hurting you, and that's not the kind of person I want to be. You're not that person. You made a difficult choice because you were scared. But you ultimately told me the truth when it mattered most, even though you knew it would be painful. Our relationship became more honest and authentic than it had ever been. She stopped filtering information or trying to protect me from uncomfortable realities, and I stopped trying to be the easygoing, low-maintenance niece who never caused problems. We began trusting each other with our real feelings and genuine concerns. The lake house became a powerful symbol of my new approach to relationships and life in general. Instead of letting it sit empty most weekends while I waited for family members who might never visit, I started hosting friends there regularly. My hiking group came up for weekend retreats where we'd explore the local trails and spend evenings around the fire pit sharing stories and laughter. College friends brought their families for summer vacations, and their children filled the house with the kind of joy and energy it had been missing. My pottery class organized an end-of-semester celebration at the lake house, and we spent a long weekend working on projects, sharing meals, and getting to know each other outside the classroom environment. The house filled up with genuine connection and authentic friendship in ways it never had before. I realized I'd been so focused on maintaining relationships with people who took me for granted that I'd never fully appreciated or nurtured the relationships with people who actually valued my presence. Friends who called just to check on me, who remembered important events in my life, who included me in their celebrations not out of obligation but out of genuine affection. About 4 months after my final conversation with Marcus, Aunt Geraldine told me that he and Jennifer had separated. Jennifer had moved back in with her parents, unable to handle the financial stress and the constant fighting. Marcus was living in a small studio apartment across town, working 2 jobs to try to pay down their enormous debt. Has he asked about me? I asked, surprised by how little emotional reaction I had to the news. He has, actually. He's asked several times if you're angry with him, if you're doing okay, if you ever mention him. What do you tell him? I tell him that you seem happier and more at peace than I've seen you in years. And it was completely true. I was happier than I'd been in years. Possibly happier than I'd ever been as an adult. Not because I was glad about Marcus's troubles, but because I was no longer carrying the exhausting weight of a relationship that had become toxic without me even realizing it. I wasn't constantly wondering why my brother seemed distant during our conversations, or making excuses for why he was too busy to spend time with me, or trying to figure out what I'd done wrong to make him pull away from me. I wasn't analyzing every interaction for signs of his approval or disapproval. Instead, I was free to invest my emotional energy in relationships that were genuinely mutual and honest. Free to love people who loved me back in the same authentic way. free to stop shrinking myself to fit into spaces where I wasn't truly welcome. The most unexpected discovery was that I didn't actually miss Marcus as much as I'd thought I would. I missed the Marcus I'd grown up with, the brother who used to tell me everything and include me in his dreams and plans for the future. But that person had been gone for over a year before I'd even realized it. The Marcus who had systematically lied to me and excluded me from his life was essentially a stranger who happened to share my childhood memories. I learned that you can love someone deeply and still choose not to have them in your life. You can forgive someone completely without reconciling with them. You can wish someone well from a distance without making yourself available to be hurt by them repeatedly. Most importantly, I learned that family isn't automatically defined by blood relations or shared history. Real family consists of people who show up consistently, who celebrate your successes instead of tolerating them, who consider your feelings when making decisions that affect you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop fighting for space in places where you're not wanted, and instead create space for people who genuinely want to be there. 8 months after Marcus's wedding that I wasn't invited to attend, I organized a celebration at the lake house. Not a housewarming party, since I'd owned the property for over 2 years, but a celebration of community and chosen family. Aunt Geraldine was there, along with my hiking friends, pottery classmates, college friends, and neighbors who had become genuine friends. As I looked around at all these people enjoying each other's company, laughing and sharing stories and creating new memories together, I realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation or guilt or walking on eggshells to avoid being excluded from future events. Just authentic affection, mutual respect, and the security of knowing that everyone present actually wanted to be there. I raised my glass of wine and offered a toast to the family we choose and the family that chooses us back. Everyone cheered enthusiastically, and in that moment I felt more genuinely loved and supported than I had in years. The brother who had considered me too embarrassing for his wedding would have been completely out of place in this room, full of people who celebrated each other's authentic selves and supported each other through both successes and challenges. I never heard from Marcus again directly. Aunt Geraldine mentioned that he eventually moved to Denver for a fresh start, and that he occasionally asked about me during their infrequent phone conversations. She said he seemed to understand that he'd lost something important, but that he'd never been able to articulate exactly what, or take full responsibility for why. I genuinely hoped he found happiness and learned to value authentic relationships over impressive ones. But mostly, I stopped thinking about him very much at all, because I'd learned the most important lesson of my adult life. Never shrink yourself to fit into places where you're not celebrated. The right people will make room for you exactly as you are, and those are the only relationships worth your precious time and emotional energy. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between maintaining a relationship and maintaining your self-respect? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a double life that excluded you? What would you have done if your own sibling asked for help after systematically betraying your trust for over a year? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own family dynamics, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about relationships, family drama, and learning to value yourself. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than being someone's secret or backup plan. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we support each other through life's most challenging moments. Remember that you are worthy of relationships where your presence is considered a gift rather than a burden, and never settle for less than that kind of love and respect. Until next time, keep choosing the people who choose you back, just as enthusiastically.